Farah, thank you so much for joining me. I'm interested to hear your perspective on what's happening in Iran. But first, if I could just hear a little bit about what you do in your work with Iranian women in New Zealand.
Sure. So I'm the founder and the chairperson for Iranian Women in New Zealand. That's a charitable trust that we started in 2020. So it is actually the first and the only organization working specifically for Iranian women here in New Zealand. And yeah, we started it about 2 years ago, and the goal was to both bring women together. So it's like improving the empathy among the women of the community, and also in order to advocate for gender equality and for the well-being of women. Yeah, since then we have been doing lots of programs and events, like from art gallery by female artists to mental health workshops and different classes, meditation sessions, yoga and Pilates classes. So whatever we can do just, to help to work for the betterment of the women.
Yeah. Could you speak to the anger that surrounds these protests since the killing of Mahsa Amini? It's my understanding that this anger has been brewing or has been there for quite some time.
Yes, so the death of Mahsa Amini was like a trigger, bringing everything, back again to us. But the situation has been going on for more than 40 years. Now it's 43 years since the system came to power, this Islamic regime in Iran. And from the first day they came to power, the situation became really difficult for women. It was like women were their main targets, and they tied their identity to women in a way to say that our women are different. So they wanted to have like a symbolic picture of women who is covered with chador and this hijab, from top to toe. And so it's like their identity is tied to hijab especially. And so when they came, one of the things that they did was that they abolished the previous family law that we had in the country. So in 1979, before that, like 1975, we got a new family law that gave women lots of rights, like it increased the minimum age of marriage for them from 15 to 18. It gave them more right in divorce, in child custody. And so it was like a time in Iran before this revolution that the country was on the track of modernization. So many things were changing for women. Women could be judges, could be the ministers, and working in politics. But just as soon as they came, everything, became reversed from them. So it was like one of the most tragic things that they did, like few years after they came to power, I think around 1982 or so, was that they changed the minimum age of marriage from 18 to 9. And it was like a shock. What are you doing? Because according to the Islamic rule, when a girl reaches 9, she is mature and she can get married. So even now in other Muslim countries, I think none of them have this 9 as the age of marriage. Usually it's 18, but they just decided to make it 9, and then they make the divorce the unilateral right for men, no child custody right for women. And even women were not able to work, to study, or to travel without their husband's permission. So if you are married, you need your husband's permission to, do these things. So the situation got really worse for women. And since then, women have been fighting, but the oppression from the regime was so bad, especially in the first, decade, the first, 20 years, it was not easy to challenge them. And women were mostly focusing on reform. So they were just trying to do some lobbies, for example, to change some of these laws and things. But unfortunately, it wasn't successful.
So what do you think is different this time about what's currently happening as opposed to those past?
Many things has changed. So one is that, as I said, we tried different forms of reform, attempt to have reforms. And we saw that the regime is not give up, to the standards that it has set for itself and for the people. So we know that the reform is not, is not going to help us anymore. It's not going to happen. That's one thing. And the other thing is that the time, now it's been 40 years, 4 decades, because when you are so cruel and, the regime is so brutal, it cannot, sorry, my daughter, it cannot last for a long time, this. And the other thing is the time and the new generation. So this generation who are about like, now they are 15, they are 20-year-old, they are very different from my generation. I was born in 1980s. And these are who were born in, 2000 or even after that. They are, they are outspoken, brave, they are connected to the world because, this social media, internet is like, now they are more aware. Absolutely. And they have been raised by parents like me, for example, educated parents, the ones who don't want their kids to live a life that they had. So this is another thing that I think is different this time.
Absolutely. What can be said about the way in which the Iranian law enforcement are responding to these protests, and do leaders around the world need to be saying more about those?
So you mean the reaction from the world or from the government?
From the deaths that have taken place in the protests or as a result of the original arrest.
Yeah, so the government has been, trying to crack down all these protests. So, and they have shown no sympathy towards people. So whoever who has been protesting has been either arrested or beaten or, killed. So, and I think that's what the reason is, that they have no other way. There is no way back for them. So the only thing they can do is to use whatever means at their hands to protect themselves, because they have no place in the world, not just in Iran. I don't know which country is gonna, accept them after this revolution. Yeah, so that's the situation in Iran. But from outside, what we have seen has not been, it's been okay, but I think it's somehow the result of all the work that we as Iranian, out of the country have been doing, around the world. We have been doing lots of campaigns and rallies and petitions, putting pressure on governments. Some of them have been successful, like in Canada, in Europe, we have seen sanctions and condemnations and things like that. And some of them, like here in New Zealand, it hasn't been that much successful, but now we know that one of the reasons was these 2 Kiwis being arrested in Iran.
Right. So on that note, I was just going to ask you, before we run out of time, what specifically would you want to see, or is important for Iranians to see from the New Zealand government, or from Jacinda Ardern in particular?
Yeah, so I've been talking about this in my interviews, that she's a feminist icon. So what we expect from her, and we think that she's a person who cares for human rights and women's rights. So we expect her, apart from condemning what's happening in Iran, as one of my friends was saying, that you cannot say I'm concerned but not doing anything about that. So if you are really concerned, you need to take some actions. And Iranians unanimously have been asking for expelling the ambassador here, or limiting this diplomatic relationship between the regime and the New Zealand government. Because as long as you are keeping your diplomatic relationship with the regime, it means that you are legitimizing it. You see it as a normal player in the international scene, but it is not. So expelling the regime is one of the important things, and cutting the financial ties that they have, because there are trading between the regime and the New Zealand government, and also around the world. So that would be another way, because this is a terrorist regime. Whatever money is given to them is not going to people. It's going to be used for Hezbollah, for Taliban, and for other extremist terrorist groups. So yeah, expelling the ambassador and cutting ties with this regime, and also putting this IRGC as this terrorist organization in the list of terrorist organizations here.
Right, completely. Well, thank you so much for your perspective and your time.